Hey, this is likely the start of a series on the Castlevania franchise. If you're watching this, there's a good chance you know Castlevania from the animated series from Netflix, which is, cool. It's pretty, it's well animated. The writing is sometimes questionable, but it is overall a decent introduction to the Castlevania universe. I like it. And that being said, this video series is about Castlevania the games, which is very different, way more complex, much thanks to the size of this monster series, so many titles. Castlevania, or in Japan, Akumajo Dracula, has grown throughout the years to be about way more than just a namesake. It takes place in a world of darkness, a reality not too different from our own, yet crawling with supernatural forces of evil. There's vampires, monsters, undead, demons, sorcery, and dark magic. The story this series tells might not be the most concise or coherent, but it's more or less consistent in theme. Castlevania is about humanity's fight against its own evils, its struggle to find tiny beams of light in a world full of shadows. I've been a fan for a very long time, not just of the games themselves, but also of the lore. So initially, I planned to just make a breakdown of the story of the series, but then I decided I'd go beyond. I plan to play every single Castlevania title ever released, even the non-canon games eventually, and use these videos to give my thoughts on them and share my experiences. I'll also be analyzing the lore and storyline of the series, while investigating all the ways it takes inspiration from folklore, mythology, literature, and 20th century cinema, and incorporates all of that into a single incredible product that the Netflix series could not match. This is like over 30 games, at least 15 of them canonical, so it'll be a lot to get through, but I'll try my best. If you're a fan of the animated series and want to learn a bit more about the games but can't be bothered to play them, stick around, I think you'll find this fun. If you're already a fan of the games but haven't played every single title, then come along with me and we'll discover some new shit together. Lastly, if you have already played every game in the series, then, well, come watch me be a noob, I guess. Let's fucking go. So the more sane way would be to start this series with the very first Akumajo Dracula in 1986 for the Famicom. But since we're focusing on the story, we'll do this like a madman. Let's go chronologically. The first game in the timeline would be Lament of Innocence, a PS2 title from 2003, and one of the few 3D games in the franchise. I've played this one before, but only twice. Once a few years ago, and again for this video. Let's see how it fares. Our story begins in 11th century Europe, the start of the High Middle Ages. It's a time of kingdoms, knights, and religious wars. The title crawl for Lament of Innocence mentions the mythical Crusades in pursuit of Jerusalem, but that's a bit of a historical mistake as far as I can tell. The Crusades only started in 1095, technically 1096, and the tale I'm about to tell is from just a bit prior. Nevertheless, our heroes for now are two famed knights in service to the Catholic Church, Baron Leon Belmont and Count Matthias Kronquist. Leon, given his name and surname, was likely a Frenchman, which the Netflix series also guessed, but he was first and foremost an immensely skilled warrior. An orphan, he had become a knight to the church at the tender age of 16 and fought honorably and valiantly to protect the world from heretics. Matthias, on the other hand, might have been Hungarian. I'll elaborate on that later. In contrast to Leon's physical prowess, Matthias was a masterful tactician and intellectual. His family had had extensive experience with the arts of alchemy, and so Matthias was also well versed in the arcane and other occult topics. These two were very good friends, and together they made for an unstoppable duel in the armies of the church. Both of them had severe weaknesses, however, and for the both of them, these weaknesses came in the form of women. Leon's fiancée, Sarah Trentul, and Matthias' wife, Elisabetta, will play central roles in both of their downfalls. The main catalyzing event of the whole series, really, is the premature death of Elisabetta. Matthias was deep into an expedition when this happened. Sudden illness overtook Elisabetta Kronqvist, and she died quickly. Matthias couldn't even watch the final moments of his loved one, and this was the beginning of his descent into madness. Leon, of course, was struck with grief upon hearing these news, but he couldn't afford to go back with his comrade. Now alone on the front lines against the heretics, he had to keep fighting for Christianity. That is, until the monsters and night creatures started showing up 1 year later, in 1094. Creatures like these aren't unheard of in this universe, but even as they invaded Leon's barony, he couldn't afford to fight back. See, the church forbade him of doing so. After all, as a knight, he was supposed to fight heathens, not monsters. And this cost him dearly, and that same year, Matthias warned Leon that this invasion was actually orchestrated by a powerful vampire called Walter Bernhard. And now, Walter had taken captive Sarah, Leon's fiancée. So what is a vampire? Okay, maybe that sounds like a stupid question, but it's important, I swear. Vampires are so widespread nowadays in popular culture, it can be easy to lose track of what they're even supposed to be. So what are they in the Castlevania universe? Well, they're close to what vampires were in the original Dracula novel by Bram Stoker. They're a form of very intelligent and charismatic undead who have attained a sort of curse which stops their bodies from aging. In exchange for that, they now have an insatiable lust for human blood and are compelled to feed themselves off of it every night, and in turn, transfer the curse to other humans with their bite. There's a wide array of benefits to being a vampire. I've already mentioned immortality, but they also get enhanced strength, speed, and endurance. They can alter their bodies, turning into animals like bats, wolves, or even a cloud of mist. And finally, they gain a natural affinity to occult magic and spells of darkness. They are creatures of the night, after all, and most, if not all of them, are evil in nature. Vampires also get weaknesses though. They have a susceptibility to divine power, such as contained in holy water and other sanctified weaponry. If they ever touch running water, it melts like acid through their skin. And finally, if they're exposed to sunlight, it burns them to ashes within seconds. This last one is especially harmful since it severely limits their activities during the day. Regardless, vampires are immensely powerful creatures of the night, which is a given as they're the main antagonists of the Castlevania franchise. Unlike in the novel, you can't just get a cross and some holy bread to scare off the big bad vampiro. No, vampires in the Castlevania universe tend to be skilled fighters as well as powerful magicians. Only a true anime warrior could ever stand a chance against one. If Leon wants to take him down and save his wife-to-be, well then, he's got one hell of a journey to get through. Not that he cares much. Determined to see Sarah again, Leon cast aside his sword, his knighthood, and his allegiance to the church. Completely unarmed then, he heads straight to the Forest of Eternal Night, the vampire's domain, so he may rescue his betrothed. It's never clearly established where the Forest of Eternal Night is located. Walter Bernhard sounds like a very German name, so I think it'd feel right to place it somewhere in Germany, or what at the time was the Holy Roman Empire. It was close enough to France, which we guessed was Leon's country before, so I think this would make sense. Also, Germany is just a pretty popular country or region for vampires, I guess. Just look at Nosferatu or Carmilla. Don't get me wrong though, the writers probably never even thought about this. I'm just making shit up. And yes, the name of the forest is quite literal, Eternal Night. This place is eternally shrouded in darkness, the sun never rises, which means vampires have free reign over here. I didn't mention this earlier, but Vampires in the original Dracula novel didn't actually burn in sunlight. That's something that was made up by Nosferatu, the 1922 silent movie. In reality, the day in the novel only made vampires weaker, unable to transform or use their other spooky powers. The day made them weaker, and so the night made them stronger, of course. The same is kind of true for Castlevania here. Like, sure, the sun kills vampires, and so it's way better if they can get a forest of eternal night all to themselves, but the night also makes them stronger. It's the time of the day when evil can prosper in full force under somber moonlight and slender shadows. My point is, this forest is bad news for Leon. Inside it, Walter is always at his very best. Leon has stepped right into the monster's den, his foe's domain, and as we'll see, that's going to bring some consequence. For now, it's unclear how this region of night even came to be, but we'll get there when we get there. Soon after setting foot into this deranged locale, Leon meets a strange man called Ronaldo Gandolfi. He recognizes Baron Leon and offers to guide him to Walter's castle. He seems friendly enough. Ronaldo actually runs a sort of shop near the gates. See, this guy's an alchemist. With little money, he's able to produce magical items and potions to help out any who wish to challenge the vampire. He explains to Leon that he's far from the first one to try this. See, Walter is a bit of a playful figure. He enjoys toying with his prey. He'll kidnap people's loved ones so they're forced to march into the forest to try and beat him. No one's beat him yet, though. The only reason Ronaldo's allowed to stay here in the shop is because Walter thinks it's funny for him to help his challengers, make the game a bit more fun, I guess. Ronaldo seems to have some sort of relationship with Walter, maybe a personal beef, but he doesn't disclose much yet. When he realizes Leon is unarmed, he supplies him with 2 items. First, a Whip of Alchemy, a powerful magical weapon to strike down evil. Second, a strange gauntlet which can act as a shield, absorbing energy which can be later used for special relics. Lastly, before Leon leaves for the castle, Ronaldo informs him that to meet Walter and Bernhard at the throne room, he must first defeat the 5 guardians scattered throughout the castle. Otherwise, the door just doesn't open. Leon is very annoyed when he realizes he's inside a video game, but he doesn't have much of a choice. Let's talk gameplay here first off. Upon arriving at the castle, the gates open and you get thrown into a tutorial section of sorts, which doesn't make any logical sense, but gets you to test out the game mechanics. The combat's pretty simple. You have a whip with a light attack and a heavy attack, and you can combine those to make some baller combos. You also have the gauntlet, which you can use to block enemy attacks, and certain attacks that conveniently glow pink can also be parried, which opens the enemy's guard for a bit. As you play the game and kill more enemies, you unlock new combos and new skills, the first of which is Guided Step, as shown here. In addition to the main combat, you also have the relics and the sub-weapons. The relics are special items you can find or buy throughout the game and activate with your magic bar. I didn't find many of them, so I didn't use them that much, but they're passive buffs, like this one that makes your steps fiery, and this one that makes you really fast. The sub-weapons, meanwhile, are a staple of the franchise. They're the secondary weapons carried by every Belmont, designed to cover for the areas their whips can't reach. They consume hearts, but that's a bountiful resource in this game. They drop from pretty much every torch you break, so you get to use them a lot. The available sub-weapons here are the knife, the axe, the holy water, the cross, and the crystal. On their own, they're nice little additions to your playstyle, but once you start collecting these items called orbs, you'll be able to use these orbs to power and alter the properties of your sub-weapons. There are 7 different orbs in the game, so that's 35 sub-weapon options they add, for a total of 40. That's a lot of variety, though of course the options aren't all balanced. Some are weaker and some are stronger, and it's kind of a pain to grind for hearts when you run out of them. I'll admit I didn't get much into the mechanics of this game either time I played it, so I can't really offer deep commentary about them, but it is kind of shallow when compared to close contemporaries like Devil May Cry or God of War. So it's really nothing too impressive, but it is fun enough to keep you interested for the playthrough. Mostly. In terms of level design, Lament goes for a sort of metroidvania approach, mimicking other Castlevania games like Symphony, but in 3D. Each area of the castle is guarded by a boss, who holds an orb, which will serve as one of the keys to the final area, where you'll meet Walter. You have to explore each of these areas, kill enemies, solve puzzles, and find some items along the way, such as health and hard max-ups, and then you can find and beat the local boss. That all sounds fine on paper, but the level design is kinda vast. The game is filled with same-looking corridors, long, boring hallways, and it's really maze-like and often annoying. Most of your game time, you'll be walking around a lot of similar rooms, trying to find the right way, and being forced into combat section after combat section with little variation. It's fine at first, but it gets very repetitive. Devil May Cry, which is from 2 years earlier, did level design much better with a mix of combat, puzzles, platforming, and whatnot. But puzzles and platforming are really rare and quite shit in this game. So, one more thing to point out is the fact that the maps in this game are completely disconnected. Like, the whole game takes place inside the same castle, but the different areas have no connecting points, save for the entrance. A very lazy choice in my opinion, considering this is clearly Metroidvania inspired. Although, considering how confusing everything is in this game, I guess I should be glad they didn't mash all maps into one. As we reach the first save room here, I'd like to make a comment. What is this place? I mean the save room. Like, I know what it is, we all know what it is. It's a save room. It's where you save the game. But what is it supposed to be in lore? Like, it's a random room with an angel statue, some water, and it heals you? And there's like 2-3 dozen rooms exactly like this scattered throughout the game? Who built these? Why does Walter allow them in his castle? I know this is nitpicky, but like, take Dark Souls or Hollow Knight. Those games have bonfires and benches as resting spots, which both make a lot of sense. Of course there'd be bonfires in Lordran, and of course there'd be benches in Hallownest. Or hell, look at Resident Evil with the typewriters. Those make some sense. But what is this room supposed to be in the Castlevania universe? I don't think anyone on the team really thought about that, and I kinda wish they did. Sorry, that was a dumb digression. Let's get on with the story. Shortly after Leon reaches a sort of warp room, there's also this other door here, but let's leave it for later. The warp room has magical platforms which lead to 5 different areas. Each of these areas is home to one of the 5 guardians. First up is the House of Sacred Remains, an abandoned cathedral filled with undead, below which lies a crypt with, well, more undead. It's kinda weird that a vampire would have a cathedral in his castle. Maybe it wasn't originally his. It is abandoned after all. This place could be where Walter gets his army of skeletons from. There's a lot of undead in this game, by the way. Well, there's a lot of undead in Castlevania in general, but in this game specifically, I think there's a weirdly low enemy variety. You'll see as we go along. Anyways, this place also has spikes and laser statues. It's easy enough to get through. Press some comically large switches, and the path forward will open. Deep within the chapel halls lies a strange room of pulsating guts, known simply as the Great Shrine. It's defended by this giant tapeworm-looking fella called the Undead Parasite. The shrine seems to be creating undead from its very flesh, so maybe it's being used by Walter to raise the numbers of his army. The parasite tries its best to stop Leon, dancing around and even breathing fire, but the shrine is destroyed, and so is the creature that lives off of it in turn. The blue orb is acquired and will serve as one of the 5 keys. If we go back to the boss arena, we'll find that the Great Shrine has vanished without a trace. The Whip of Alchemy thus far has proven to be a formidable tool against these creatures, but the next challenges won't be so easy. After quick shopping with Ronaldo, Leon returns to the castle and enters the ghostly theater. This area makes me really annoyed. It's this complex, almost Victorian-era theater, which looks pretty nice. The problem, it's 1094. The Victorian era is some 7.5 centuries later. And yeah, I know we're talking about a fantasy series, and it doesn't always have to make sense, but this specific example really messes with our real-world timeline, and it just rubs me the wrong way. It's not the only time this happens in the series. Even the House of Sacred Remains feels really gothic in style, which would not be appropriate for 1094. But of course, I'm not gonna fault the developers too much, and they probably just wanted to make something cool and thought it fit the spooky theme the series has got going. And that's fine. It just makes for very confusing lore. Like, are we supposed to imagine the world of Castlevania is just ahead of us in time? Or did Walter and Bernhard personally commission a Victorian-era theater for his medieval castle? I don't know, let's stop thinking about it. The theater's guarded by a bunch of monsters, giant falling spikes, a Cyclops duo, and giant laser-breeding dragon skulls, but it's not much harder than the last area. Beyond a dark room with really annoying jumps, Leon acquires a little handbell, which can be rung thrice at the main stage for the curtains to be raised. The show's about to begin, and the main lead is played by Sarah Trentel?
Leon, you came to save me.
Oh, thank goodness. I'm so glad you're not hurt.
I can't believe you're safe.
Let's get out of here first.
Yes.
Who are you?
Oh my. Too bad. And I thought this would work so well.
Yeah, that's a succubus. They're demons from Jewish tradition, the first one of which was said to be Lilith, Adam's first wife and traitor to God. Succubi were said to attack men in their dreams and forcibly have sex with them to steal their life or their juices. Apparently they needed them to live. Well, the modern interpretation of the succubus is very different and is more of a charismatic seductress than a sex monster of the night, and this one here fits with the former. She seems to be able to disguise herself as the loved ones of other people to trick them into falling into her claws, and when that doesn't work, she reveals her true form and declares her intent to make Leon suffer as much as possible. She seems to be pretty into this whole sadistic thing, so maybe she does get her energy from pleasure. Anyways, she's much more dangerous than a parasite. She flies pretty fast, summons poisonous flowers, summons shadow clones, and worst of all, gives you sleep paralysis so she can suck you. I mean on the lips. After she's defeated, she regrets not having maintained a Sarah disguise to fuck with us, and drops some interesting tidbits about her previous fight with a certain old man. Yeah, apparently this succubus had fought Ronaldo before, and beat him by disguising herself as his daughter. Looks like it's backstory time. 5 years ago, Walter attacked Ronaldo's home as he was away. When Ronaldo got back home, all he saw was a sea of blood, his wife and son dead, and his daughter pale, laughing, turned into a vampire and responsible for the brutal murder of her own family. That's when Ronaldo created the Whip of Alchemy, and with it, he killed his own daughter in cold blood to rid her of her suffering. He later tried to challenge Walter, but thanks to the succubus, of course, this attempt at revenge was quickly thwarted. Ronaldo then had to resort to becoming a simple vendor, seeking to help those who may actually have the power to beat the vampire. But the succubus is dead now, and has yielded the yellow orb. Armed with a new hatred for Walter, Leon treads onward. The next stop is the Dark Palace of Waterfalls. This is a maze-like cave/sewer system beneath the castle, through which runs a river of some kind. It's filled to the brim with the usual enemies, plus a lot of fishmen, and it's really annoying to navigate. There's water currents blocking your way, and these weird skull tunnels where you move on a platform, and it's kind of like a minigame, and they take you to different parts of the stage, and it's a fucking maze. I was very, very lost both times I played this. Early on though, Leon will enter a room where his shadow will seem to gain life. It then manifests as a doppelganger, assuming his form and attempting battle. Doppelgangers are a pretty ingrained concept in popular culture, right? Like popular horror things in general. The term is German, it literally means walking double, but the idea that there's someone out there who looks exactly like you and could possibly be an evil spirit trying to take over your life is present in many different cultures. In the case of this doppelganger here, it's pretty evil and pretty fucking strong. Like, look at that health bar, man. Jesus, that's not fair. It has like an evil version of the whip and some unholy water as weapons. I had a hard time, honestly. Took me a few tries, but he's not strong enough. Leon beats him, and he runs away for now, diving into the water below. Behind a breakable wall further on, we'll find a cavernous path that leads to a frosty region covered in ice, where an optional boss is found. Some sort of alchemical circle on the ground manifests this cold energy in the physical form of an elemental. Elementals are also popular concepts. They were born in Renaissance-era alchemical studies and were later translated to fiction. They're these primordial beings which represent the fundamental forces of the world, in this case the four elements: air, earth, fire, water, and whatever else is in between. This sexy-looking frost elemental here has some pretty cool moves, but she's not that hard to beat. When she dies, the Whip of Alchemy seems to absorb her power. Leon can now use the Whip of Ice, which is pretty similar to the normal whip, it just has ice power. There will be more of these elemental rooms later on. They seem to be designed to harness the elements, perhaps. In any case, the circles on the ground definitely tie them to alchemy, as does their contact with the Whip of Alchemy. Maybe they were built by Walter for nefarious purposes, or by someone else we'll mention later. I don't know. For now, let's move on to the boss of the area. After pushing levers and lowering a bridge, the path opens to a murky chamber. As it turns out, Walter had been using this cave system as a prison for this here fellow named Joachim Armster. He's a vampire too, which means he would have had a very hard time getting past all the flowing water in the area. That's why he was stuck. Now Leon's freed him, but he doesn't seem too thrilled with his presence anyhow.
No. It'll be a nice prelude to defeating Walter. I'll beat you to a pulp!
Joachim has a very good grasp over magic and uses telekinesis to move a bunch of swords around and attack us. He's also invincible for most of the fight, and you have to break these crystals for his shield to drop. Very cool, but not that hard, and he's weak to the ice whip actually. Once he's defeated, we learn all of his story. Apparently, Joachim had tried to beat Walter himself, but Walter's power was too great. Before fading into dust to leave us with the green orb, Joachim mumbles some stuff about the Ebony Stone and the Crimson Stone, which only leaves Leon more confused. As he questions Ronaldo, he explains that the Ebony Stone and the Crimson Stone are two incredibly powerful alchemical creations, imperfect attempts at producing the legendary Philosopher's Stone, which is a real thing. Well, a real concept in alchemy, not an actually real thing. It was said to be capable of granting eternal life to its wielder. Unfortunately, the process through which these two fakes were created are long lost now. The Ebony Stone, other than granting incredible dark power, is also the cause of the eternal night that shrouds this very forest. It's currently in the ownership of Mr. Bernhard. The Crimson Stone, in contrast, has unknown whereabouts, but it's said to be able to convert the souls of vampires into immeasurable power, and also to bear the curse of vampirism itself. So you can see how both of these are very malign distortions of the original Philosopher's Stone. The Crimson Stone does grant immortality, but it's immortality via vampirism, which isn't exactly the greatest, and makes you pretty evil by default. The Ebony Stone, meanwhile, stops time. Just not your time. It sustains eternal moonlight, which is just perfect for a creature of the night. In fact, both of these stones, even if not serving their original purposes, are incredible tools for any evil vampire overlord who wants to take over the world. Walter already has the Ebony Stone. If he could get his hands on the Crimson Stone, that would probably be very bad. But again, as far as we know, no one has any idea where that is. The Garden Forgotten by Time is an extremely large garden, which honestly feels too big. There's a bit of backtracking in this level, and it's so boring to walk this huge place. It's populated by mostly undead, but also some gargoyles that petrify you, and these huge plants which you can climb, but they might poison you. The main idea of the area is finding these statues and pushing them into place, so you open the doors to the local boss. But before we get to that, there's a peculiar little tower here which must be visited. Close to the stormy skies hides one more statue, and the doors to the Thunder Elemental. He's my favorite of the elementals in the game. Pretty cool attack patterns involving lightning, and once he's beat, Leon's whip absorbs him as well, and can now become the Whip of Lightning. The second to last room here is surrounded by these statues which look like Mesopotamian Lamassu. By destroying them, a way is revealed beyond a hidden door, and it's here that Leon meets the master of the garden. It's none other than a flying Medusa head. Yeah.
A wonderful sight, weren't they?
The Medusa is another one that barely requires introduction, I think. She's a monster from Greek mythology. In one of her myths, she was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters, all of them daughters of a sea god. In a later Roman myth, she was actually a mortal who was cursed by the goddess Athena to have snakes for hair and just be really ugly. In any case, Medusa is a scary, snaky Greek lady who can petrify humans with a simple stare, and was eventually killed by the hero Perseus, by being beheaded, in fact. The presence of the Medusa in the Castlevania series is likely at least partially inspired by the 1964 movie Gorgon from Hammer Film Productions. Hammer Film in general is a central inspiration to the early Castlevania games, though of course in that movie she wasn't a giant floating head. She wasn't even called Medusa, in fact she was called Megara, which is supposed to be a Fury, not a Gorgon. Her appearance here can be explained by simple video game logic of course, but also by the mythology. This game takes place well over 2000 years after the stories of Perseus, so maybe Walter was able to resurrect Medusa with his magic and alchemy, but not her full body, so she has to stay like this, in this incomplete form, posing as the head of an abandoned statue. Or maybe she's not the original Medusa, just a fiendish creation posing as the same thing? I don't know. Anyhow, she wants to make Leon into a beautiful statue for her pretty little garden, which obviously ain't happening. This fucker's big, though that means she's also slow. She mostly attacks with her snake hair, but she can also unleash snake swarms, flying rocks, and petrification rays. Another easy boss though. As she falls, she begins turning to stone herself, but first spouts some stuff about the whip being more powerful than before. I guess Ronaldo has already fought her. Apparently, there's a way for the Whip of Alchemy to reach its final form and become even more powerful, but Ronaldo refuses to tell us how. With the purple orb in hand, only the red orb remains. It's found in the Anti-Soul Mysteries lab. Despite the weird name, it's the most typically medieval area in the entire game. It's this set of stone halls with furnaces and weird machinery, and sometimes small libraries, all filled with monsters of course. The soundtrack for this area is a fucking bop, which does not reflect the gameplay. This place makes me fall asleep. Anyways, I think the implication is that Walter was conducting some bizarre experiments here, maybe to figure out how to make the Crimson Stone or something. Alchemy in general is a pretty big theme in this game, which I find really interesting, and fitting for the time period. It doesn't really show up anywhere else in the series though, save for Saint Germain in the Netflix adaptation, so that's a pity I guess. The Flame Elemental can be found here. I think he's a bit too simple to fight, he mostly just swings his sword around. Once Leon absorbs him, he obtains the Whip of Flames, which does exactly as advertised. It can be used in conjunction with the Whip of Ice on the statue here to break it and find the white orb. The white orb is optional though. The boss is in this room here, with a weird wall with a scribbling on it, saying meth. But when you bring the letter E from the other side of the stage, it becomes E-meth, which means truth in Hebrew apparently, and then a giant stone golem is formed. Golems are originally from Jewish tradition. They're built from the dust of the earth, just as Adam was built by God, but they're creations of men, meant to serve men. One of the many ways to activate a golem is by inscribing the word truth on its forehead, and to deactivate it, you need only to erase the first letter. Met, or meth, I guess, means death, so it just dies if you do that. Leon doesn't have the luxury to do that though. He has to beat the golem. Apparently this golem is serving Walter because it immediately attempts to maul us. I really like this fight. This golem has some cool attacks, and even a second phase where it gains another health bar, loses an arm, and becomes even crazier. You can only hit him in its core from here on out. Once it's destroyed, it leaves us the red orb. Leon has beat Walter's game. The path to his throne should be open now. Except, as soon as we cross the door, well, first it's not the throne room, I lied, but second, Walter instantly teleports in front of us to welcome us into his castle, which is fucking hilarious. We've been in this castle for so long. Anyways, when Leon asks for Sarah, he actually obliges, though he does try to do some mental control on Leon, you know, pretty common vampire power. Leon resists, attempts to whip him up, and that fails. The Whip of Alchemy doesn't do shit against Walter. He tells us to find him at the top of the castle because he likes to play games, I guess. And so Leon decides to take his weekend fiancée back to Ronaldo where she'll be safer.
Sarah, this way!
Psych! It's not safe at all. So Ronaldo apparently has this magic barrier which protects his house from undead and creatures of the night. Problem, it just triggered on Sarah. So yeah, Ronaldo confirms that Sarah has been vampirized by Walter, just as his own daughter had been vampirized years before. It won't be long until her transformation is complete, and by then, she'll completely lose herself to the curse. This trope of the bad vampire vampirizing the girl just to spite the male lead is already in the original Dracula story, by the way, with Mina Harker, and I guess also Lucy Westerna. Though in that case, Dracula wasn't really trying to spite anyone, it's just something that kind of happened. But yeah, vampires are often used as metaphors for sexual predators, so of course the stories very commonly make them prey on women, even the female ones. We'll get there when we get there. Hopping off the tangent train, the news that his girl is on death row is pretty brutal to Leon, and to top it off, he can't even dent the fucker who did this. It's here that Ronaldo reveals that there is a known method to achieve the whip's true power. It needs to absorb a tainted soul, who willingly gives in to its cracking. In other words, Leon needs to kill Sarah with the Whip of Alchemy. Her soul can make the whip complete. Leon isn't very willing to comply. After all, he only came here in the first place to save Sarah. But she overhears the conversation. And surprise, she's not very happy with the idea of spending the rest of eternity as a bloodthirsty monster. She gives in.
Then I won't die in vain. I do not want anyone else to suffer my fate.
Sarah asks Leon to kill her. And so he does.
All becomes one in infinity. The tainted soul joins his. Undesired and cursed soul. His blood accepts your hatred for the power to slay your kind. Now, use the whip against Sarah!
I swear to you, no more will suffer your fate!
Thank you, Leon.
With Sarah buried and her soul sacrificed, the Whip of Alchemy has now become the Vampire Killer, the legendary weapon of the Belmont clan that will be passed on for uncountable generations. The Bane of the Night. With this in hand, Leon enters the final area of the game, the Pagoda of the Misty Moon. This is the main structure of the castle. It's pretty gothic in architecture, which again doesn't really fit with the time period, but whatever, right? This is one of the cooler areas because it's pretty straightforward. Right off the bat here we have the rematch with the doppelganger, though it's way stronger this time, and for some reason it's fighting with flaming fists. It kindly drops an HP max up after dying. The main gimmick in Pagoda is this tablet here. You need to fit the missing piece, which is number 4, but you only have number 6. So to get number 4, you need to go all the way around to this weird room where you spin it around so it becomes 4, and then go back, fill the tablet, and get the Dragon's Crest, which opens the door to the actual throne room, for real this time. Yeah, never mind, it's not that straightforward, fuck. But we are in the final stretch now. Just before we get there, we need to visit the opposite tower for this little thing. There, an unlocked jewel can be found. Remember the room adjacent to the warp room? No? Okay, it leads to a horrifically long stairway which pretty much descends into hell. When you get there, you can use the unlocked jewel to open this mysterious sealed door and meet this game's main secret boss in the Prison of Eternal Torture. Ooh, edgy. This is meant as a prison to a very powerful being known simply as the Forgotten One, and it's apparently been here for a long time. It's not really related to anything else in the game, it's just some bonus content. The Forgotten One is probably the hardest fight in the game. It's this giant demon monster that's lost its legs and lower torso, and it's chained up by its flesh, which is definitely good news, cause this thing would fucking wreck me if it was let loose. The first phase is kind of a chore. You have to hit it a lot while dodging these maggots that are falling from the sky, and they can poison you, curse you, or all of the above. The curse effect, by the way, makes it so you can't use combos or any other skills, so fuck these maggots for cursing me. The second and third phases are cooler, lots of dodging punches and then breath weapons. This boss is really meaty, ironically enough, and pretty tough to beat, but I think overall I like it. This was, I believe, the first time in the game I used a healing potion on a boss. The only other time was in the final boss, but that's actually 2 bosses, so that doesn't count. For your troubles, the Forgotten One drops the last orb in the game, the Black Orb, which is pretty cool. That being said, I think it's time we meet Walter for one last time.
Welcome. I have been waiting, Leon.
Walter, I will never forgive you.
I see. It seems you have enjoyed the gift that I gave you.
Yes. Thanks to that, I now have the power to defeat you.
Well, that power is quite something. But I am beloved by the night. You will taste my powers.
I'll kill you and the knight!
Interesting. Now the curtain rises on this delightful little game.
To Walter's dismay, Leon is able to use the vampire killer's newfound power to shatter the Ebony Stone. The Eternal Night is no longer, but that doesn't mean it's over. Moonlight still shines, and so the battle rages on. Walter here has plenty of magic tricks up his sleeve. He is supposed to be an alchemist after all, though one of his attacks is just a very strong punch.
You must be the Belmont.
I think this is a pretty good 3D adaptation of the usual 2D final boss we have for the series, which we'll see in future videos, with him teleporting around and shooting stuff at you and all. When he's inevitably defeated, he swears to get revenge once he returns with his vampiric powers of immortality. Unfortunately for him though, his soul isn't gonna stay around for much. Introducing Death. The Green Reaper is another concept that needn't be explained. It's rooted in popular culture, the deity of death. In the case of the Castlevania series, death is less of a god and more of a mysterious demonic entity which supposedly originated from the fundamental forces of chaos and evil. It isn't literally the concept of death, it's just a demigod that kills people. The Netflix adaptation does get this part right, though over there, death is way less serious. In this game, he was working with Walter to help him take over the world, because of course he's evil, or that's what Walter thought. In truth, Death was only waiting for the chance to strike. He steals Walter's soul and delivers it to, oh shit, the Crimson Stone, which just so happens to be in the possession of one Count Matthias Kronqvist. This is where all that teasing about Matthias being from a family of alchemists finally pays off. It's not the best plot twist, but it does have some foreshadowing. It turns out that he and Death orchestrated this entire situation so Leon would enter the forest, create the vampire killer with Sarah's soul, kill Walter, and deliver his soul so Matthias could power the Crimson Stone. We're talking galaxy brain here, folks. You might remember that the Crimson Stone makes you into a vampire, and that's what Matthias is using it for. Not only has he become immensely powerful by absorbing Walter's powers, he's now also immortal.
Risked our lives and fought for the sake of God. But God mercilessly stole away the one I loved most. When all I ever wished for was Elizabetha's safety. If limited life is God's decree, then I shall defy it, and within that eternity, I shall curse him forevermore.
It seems Matthias has gone a bit off the deep end thanks to Elizabetha's death. This is what he's been doing in the months he's been gone, seeking a way to defy life itself, forever, which doesn't sit very well with Leon, especially since this little stunt involves Sarah's death, intentional or not. Matthias offers to give Leon immortality as well, but Leon refuses. To Leon, living an eternity without his loved one would be agonizing, which puts him as a direct opposite to Matthias. So Matthias leaves in little bat form, and leaves Leon as dinner for Mr. Death here. He takes us into his death dimension, and so begins the actual final fight. It's a cool fight. It's pretty challenging without making the boss have a bloated health bar, though it is a bummer that you have to fight Walter again if you die. After escaping flying scythes, exploding skulls, and fire lasers of doom, we beat Death. Turns out not even divine beings are safe from the vampire killer, such is its power. You can't actually kill Death though, as he says he's just going to come back whenever Matthias wishes him so. But Leon does issue a warning.
This message. You have become a cursed being, and I will never forgive you. This whip and my kinsmen will destroy you someday. From this day on, the Belmont clan will hunt the night!
With this little speech, the fate of the Belmont family is sealed forever. The vampire killer, born of the tainted soul of one heroic woman, shall eternally be the weapon against the night, protector of humanity, and mortal enemy of Matthias Kronqvist, he who turned away from God. Also, the castle starts collapsing because video game logic. The first rays of sunlight in years reach the darkened forest. Walter Bernhard's macabre kingdom lies in shambles, and Leon Belmont has completed his journey. But somewhere out there, the newly born vampire Matthias Kronqvist still walks the earth. Side note, Matthias doesn't state this directly in-game, but I believe the reason he wanted immortality wasn't just to defy the will of God. It wasn't just for power, either. I think he might have wanted to buy time. Time to research alchemy, the arcane and the dark arts, in pursuit of a way to bring Elisabetta back. I can spoil that though, she doesn't come back. Ever. At least not exactly. It's a tragic story, really. A good man driven to madness by grief, so much so that one of his closest friends has to make an oath to put him to rest for good. I guess that's why Leon's the hero here. Unlike Matthias, he was able to overcome his grief and swear to do the right thing. As I've said before, the story paints Leon and Matthias as polar opposites in this sense. They're metaphors for good and evil, selflessness and selfishness. Second side note, Matthias' name is likely in reference to the real-life Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary from 1458 to 1480. That's why I guessed he was Hungarian earlier. From what I can glean, this reference is pretty surface level, save for the fact that, during his lifetime, Matthias held a very special prisoner in his kingdom, Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia. This guy is important, because of course he's one of the inspirations for Matthias' future identity. For the following centuries in the Castlevania universe, Matthias will remain an elusive figure, disappeared into the shadows of Eastern Europe. But he will eventually re-emerge as Vlad Tepes, or, more simply put, Dracula. But let's save it for the sequel. So that pretty much does it for Lament, and for the very first Belmont journey of the franchise. Well, chronologically. For my closing thoughts, I guess I can reinstate my earlier opinion in the gameplay section. I think the game has cool ideas, a lot of them, but it's very repetitive and not that interesting for the most of it. My favorite parts are the bosses, definitely. They're pretty fun, but there's few of them. Most of the game is just walking a lot, and there's not even warp rooms or anything. If you're looking for a hack and slash type from the early 2000s, you'd be better off with DMC or God of War. As for the story, I like it. It's a bit of a retcon plot, of course, because it establishes the rivalry of the Belmonts and Dracula as way older than was originally intended, 1094, and it even gives the bad guy another name. But as an origin story to what was already established, I think it works well enough. It even teases this medieval knight crusade aesthetic, which I really wish this series did more with. By the way, you might have heard some Japanese grunting by Leon in some of my recordings. I was actually playing the game with the Japanese dub this time around, but for the video I ended up deciding to use the English dub version of the cutscenes. I like both dubs, they're both fine, but the English I think I like a little more. It's really dramatic and theatrical, it's lovely. I especially enjoy Death, Walter, and Matthias in the final cutscenes.
No! You betrayed me! I shall take your soul!
After beating the main game, you unlock Crazy Mode, which is just a harder version of the game with different enemy placement and stronger enemies, and also Joachim Mode, which is what you're seeing right now. It lets you play the whole game as him, and he's really strong. He floats around really fast, and he attacks with his floating swords in one of two stances, either swinging in wide arcs or shooting straight forward. There's also magic, which is fun. It's pretty much a victory lap, really. The game is way easier and honestly kinda boring, but it's a cool experience nonetheless. Most of the items are either gone or replaced, most of the locked doors are open, and there's no story or cutscenes. Not much for me to talk about really, just game. Well, there is one cutscene after you beat Death and claim Walter's throne. Non-canon, of course, as cool as it'd be to see more of Joachim in the series. After you beat this, there's also Pumpkin Mode, which is a joke, and I think I've exhausted all I can say for now. Do stick around to the channel if this was your cup of tea. Dracula's Curse should be up next.